Hello everyone, this is Jonathan Little, and I'm here today with the 13th episode of Weekly Poker Hand. And today I'm going to be going over a hand I played in an event, I believe it was at Borgata recently. It's very early in the day in this tournament. Everyone has about 100 big blinds. The blinds are 50, 100. We all have 10,000 chips. And in this hand, a weak player limps from second position. A player in third position who is also weak decides to limp. And then a player who I quantify as a bad, loose-aggressive player raises to 350 from middle position. And it's important to note that players can all play in similar styles before the flop, but then have very different post-flop games. And usually a bad, loose-aggressive player is someone who, knows to raise and re-raise a lot before the flop. But then after the flop, they tend to not really know what they're doing. And I usually quantify these as bad lags. I know what that means in my mind, and I definitely suggest that you develop some sort of classification system in your mind that helps you compartmentalize players, even though every player is very unique and every player does something different incorrectly. Try to at least know in general, like, how does a bad lag play? How does a random weak type player play? And that will help you make decisions in all of your hands. So if 7-5 suited on the button with 100 big blinds facing a 3.5 big blind raise, I think this is a pretty great spot to call. I could also just fold. I don't think 7-5 suited is a hand you have to play. But whenever I'm early in a tournament and very deep stacked, I am more than happy to call and see a flop with hands that flop extraordinarily well. And being in position, that's a huge bonus. If I was out of position in this hand, like say I was in the small blind or big blind, I would pretty much fold every time. But being in position allows you to extract a ton of extra value. It allows you to bluff on scary boards easily. It just gives you many more options that you don't have when you're out of position. So I think I'm probably going to see a flop almost every time. Both of the blinds fold, and then both of the limpers call as expected. And the flop comes ace, 4, 2 with 2 clubs. The 4 and the 2 are of clubs. So I have a flush draw. I have the 7-5 of clubs. It checks around to the bad, loose, aggressive player who bets 800. So he bets 800 into 1,500. And at this point, I can either raise or I can call. I'm certainly not folding. Knowing that the bad, loose, aggressive player is betting into 3 other players, that doesn't necessarily mean that he has to have a very strong hand, but he probably has something. As we see in this video, he actually has ace-jack in this hand, but I don't know that. Your opponents don't show you their cards in the middle of a hand. So at this point, I think that I probably want to call in general because I felt like if I raised, he may just never fold an ace, and if he has worse than an ace, I'm probably going to be able to win the hand with a turn bet anyways. And also, if one of the limpers happens to raise, I think I could easily fold because then I'm going to be against a set or a better draw a lot of the time. So this is a spot where I think calling is by far the best option. Even though raising leads to some good things, I think that being in position, I'm much happier calling. If I was out of position, I probably would raise because then I don't think I would be able to reasonably steal the pot too often whenever my opponent has pocket 9s or something like that. So I definitely like calling when he bets half pot. Both of the weak limpers folded, so who knows what they had. Then the turn's the 3 of clubs, which is fantastic. I have a flush. Anytime you have a flush, that's great. Notice the board is ace, 4, 2, 3. So any 5 makes a straight at this point as well. I was kind of surprised when my opponent bet 2,300, which is a fairly large bet. He bet 2,300 into 3,100. And at this point, I was thinking that he could easily have an ace with a club. He could also easily just have a 5. I mean, bad lags do raise with a 5. Obviously, I have a 5 in my hand, so that makes that a little bit less likely. Or he could just have air. And if he has air, I don't really want him to fold. And, if he has air, it probably has a club in it. But I'm okay letting him draw to a club because I know that if a club comes, I can easily fold if he blasts it. Also, 2 of the clubs are particularly good for me. The ace of clubs is good, and the 6 of clubs is good. So I actually don't have to fade as many outs as you may think. So normally if there are 9 cards left, I have 2 of them, so there are 7 left. And then I have 2 good ones, so there are 5 bad spades, or 5 bad clubs left. And also he has 1 in his hand sometimes, so now there's only 4 bad clubs left. Give or take a little bit, sometimes he could just have the ace of clubs. Anyways, I think in this scenario I need to call because I think if I raise, I really give my opponent the opportunity to get off the hook. And the last thing I want to do is let my opponent get off the hook with a hand like pocket 9s with the 9 of clubs or ace of hearts, jack of diamonds, exactly like what he has. I would hate to shove this and have him fold, thinking that I either have a flush or a really good made hand, which I probably would if I shoved. So because of that, I think calling is probably going to be the best play. I think that's going to lead to good things. It's worth mentioning that my opponent's bet on the turn. I don't really like it, but I can understand why bad lag would bet here. A lot of bad lags think, well, I need to protect my hand and get value from random club draws. But in reality, like, what is my flop calling range? It's going to be mostly aces, which I'm probably going to fold to this unless I have a good draw. Or it's going to be flushes. Or hands that contain a 5, like 6-5 or something like that. So I definitely hate this bet by my opponent. I don't really think it's going to succeed too often. I don't think this is even a good spot to think about bluffing. I mean, maybe my opponent thought he was bluffing. Like, what? Am I really going to fold a better hand here? I'm not going to fold ace-2. I'm not going to fold ace-queen. So I think it's a pretty bad bluff if he is deciding to bluff. Of course, you don't need to necessarily look at it as, is this a bad bluff on this street? You need to think, is this a bad bluff throughout the hand? Because if he's planning on shoving the river, if I'm sitting here with ace-king or something like that I decided to just call with preflop, I'm not happy. I mean, I'm probably still just going to call a bad lag because, bad lags bluff a lot. But this is one of these weird spots where I'm not really sure if my opponent was bluffing or value betting. This is one of these spots where his hand is right in the middle, such that if he bets, I'm probably going to call with almost all better hands and fold almost all worse hands. And anytime your hand is right in that area, it's usually not a good idea to turn it into a bluff. Unless your opponent just happens to be really tight and will fold out something like ace-2. And, I mean, if you guys know anything about my game, I'm kind of a calling station in these spots because they look like such good bluff opportunities that if they look like great bluff opportunities, they probably are. And if my opponent's going to be bluffing some, I probably just need to call. So, anyways, I think I have a pretty easy call. I definitely don't like my opponent's line in this hand on many of the post-flop streets, and this is the reason that I want to be calling with stuff like 7-5 suited on the button, because it's going to induce my opponent to do silly stuff. That's just what he's going to do. And if you are against an opponent who is going to do silly things, you want to make a point to get to spots where they do make mistakes. I actually recently just made a live webinar where I went very in-depth on discussing how you should pinpoint and exploit your opponent's weaknesses. And this hand is a beautiful example of that. In this webinar, I'm going to discuss how you figure out exactly what your opponent does wrong. Because a lot of players, they know their opponents are bad, but they don't know what they do incorrectly. So I'm going to discuss how you figure out what your opponents do incorrectly. And then I'm going to discuss also how you sort of get yourself in those spots where your opponent is going to make mistakes. So say, for example, your opponent is going to continuation bet the flop too often, which a lot of players will. You really want to get to the flop against that player because he's going to continuation bet too often, and that's going to allow you to check raise very often. I think a lot of players are good at figuring out what their opponent does wrong, but then they just don't do anything about it. I mean, so many times I've been playing with players at, say, the World Series of Poker who know that their opponent's running them over, right? Like they know this guy's running them over. So their adjustment, instead of fighting back, is to play tighter and wait for really good hands. But most people who are running you over, they're aware that, oh, this guy's really knitting it up. Whenever he finally plays back at me, he probably just has it. So I'm going to be discussing a lot of the main spots where players have weaknesses. And then I'm going to be discussing what you can do to get well out of line and exploit those players. So if you have any interest in that, check that out. You can check out this and some of my other webinars that I have available at jonathanlittlepoker.com/videos. And if you click on all of these links, quite often they have a free preview video. So if you want more content from me that is much more in depth, because I can only go so deep in a 10-minute podcast on one hand, but in these webinars, I go through numerous hands, numerous situations. Also, the people in the webinars usually ask a lot of questions, which makes the discussion fantastic. So definitely check that out. And if you want to get free access to my email list and also a free video, go to jonathanlittlepoker.com. On all the pages, there is a opt-in form where you can type your email address, and then you get a free video right off the bat as well. So definitely check that out if you like my content. If you don't like my content, then don't check it out. So thank you guys very much for watching. I appreciate you being here, and I will talk to you next time. This has been Jonathan Little for Weekly Poker Hand.